I am in my last year of high school. Now, most of my friends and classmates by now have already gotten some kind of a job, whether that's working at a fast food place or even helping their own parents with a little business they set up themselves. I was one of the few who just couldn't manage to get a job. Every application I sent out was merely received with the usual copy and paste reply summed up to "you weren't chosen." But I had to get in money some way. That's what led me to start making and setting up flyers for a sort of house-sitting service. As old school as it seemed, a lot of my neighbors were usually going away on various trips, and very few of them leave their houses alone, so they'd usually call up a friend or someone they knew to look after things. To be honest, I wasn't expecting to really get any offers for that reason. That was until I got a call from a friend of mine. To keep it brief, they called because he and his parents were going out of town for the Easter weekend, and their usual house sitter had recently tested positive. They almost canceled the trip until they saw my flyer. I accepted the offer and was told to go to his house early in the morning on Friday to give me the basic rundown on what to do and how to take care of things. Thankfully, they were bringing their dog with them for the trip, so I wouldn't need to worry about that. I got to the house around 6:30 in the morning on Friday. My friend was already waiting for me at the front door of the house to give me the standard tour. To provide a little detail, the house itself was a standard one-story suburban home. From the front door, there was the living room, which held a reclining, sand-colored couch facing one large flat-screen TV. From the living room, straight ahead from the front door, led into the kitchen to the immediate right, and a large dining room ahead. The kitchen had a door that led into a laundry room, and the dining room led to 3 other areas. Midway through the dining room, there was an alcove that had 3 doors, or 4 if you counted the towel closet beside the door straight ahead from the alcove entrance. That door led to the guest bathroom, and to the left was a room filled with various creative supplies and materials. To the right was the den, which had a second TV and a computer within. At the end of the dining room were a set of glass doors leading to the back porch. The blinds were half closed, so I was able to see a little bit of the backyard as well. To the left of that was my friend's room, and to the right was his parents' room, or the master bedroom as others would call it. After the tour and a basic rundown on what needed to be done, my friend waved me goodbye before heading off with his parents. I decided to check over each room before heading away myself. They had told me to come by each morning and each evening to check over the house and tidy things up if needed. They left me their phone number in case anything went wrong, although I wasn't expecting anything to really happen. As I was checking the kitchen, my eyes caught a glimpse of what seemed like an envelope of some kind resting in the middle of the granite-counted island at the center of the kitchen. I picked it up, assuming it was just some mail from their other family members, until I saw what was written on the front. In black pen ink, it read, "Additional house rules." I thought to myself that there might be some other things that they may be used to with their usual house sitter that they want me to do as well. I opened up the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. I was not expecting what I was about to read. On the paper, it read as follows. Additional house rules. Rule number 1. Arrive and enter the house at the exact same time each morning and evening. No exceptions. Rule number 2. Make sure any and all doors of any kind are closed. If you find a door open and you don't remember opening it, close it and avoid entering that room for at least 5 minutes. Rule number 3. If anyone calls the house phone past 7 p.m., do not answer it, even if it is our number. Rule number 4. Keep the alcove light and the master bedroom lights on while you are inside the house. Other lights are optional to keep on. However, if any lights you turned on happen to turn off for any reason, go to the alcove or master bedroom until the lights turn on again. Rule number 5. During your evening check, do not leave the house at any time before 7 and 7:30. Past those times, you may leave at any time. Rule number 6. Close the blinds to the backyard before doing anything else during the evening. Do not look out into the backyard for any reason. These rules read to me more like some kind of safety manual more than one standard rule set. I honestly thought it was some kind of joke that my friend wanted to play on me before he had to leave. Regardless, I kept the list and I headed out for the day. I arrived around 6:45 that night for the evening check. I entered the house and began looking around the house for anything out of place, as instructed. The house was brightly lit, as I had turned every light on so I could see. Any doors were closed, so I had to open them to check inside. It wasn't until I reached my friend's room when I started noticing anything unusual. The door to his room was cracked open, unlike the other doors of the house so far. As I approached the room, I began to hear what sounded like something scratching at the door, and before I got within arm's reach of the door, the light in that room flickered very slightly before abruptly shutting off. I began backing away from the door just as it began to slowly creak open. I backed into the door leading to the master bedroom and I quickly bolted in, closing the door behind me. The creaking of my friend's room door stopped. For a good 10 seconds, it was dead silent. The only sound was that of my own slowed breathing. Then I began to hear slow-moving footsteps coming from the room. They slowly approached the door to the master bedroom, which I was right behind. I looked under the door in hopes I could see who or what it was, but there was nothing. I saw a shadow stretching slightly into the room from under the door as if something was there, yet my eyes saw absolutely nothing. I then began to hear the scratching I heard earlier, now coming from behind the door. I had no idea what to do. What could I even do? Whatever it was, I couldn't even see it. Eventually, after about 5 long minutes, the scratching abruptly stopped. The shadow under the door was gone. I hesitated before cracking the door open to peek outside the room. My friend's room was lit up again, and the door was wide open. I checked the door I was cowering behind, and there was no evidence that anything had ever been there, let alone had been scratching at the door. I checked the time on my phone. It read 7:05 p.m. I stepped out into the dining room and noticed that the blinds to the backyard weren't closed. I went over to close them, but not before catching a glimpse of the outside. Out on the backyard was a tall, animalistic, shadowed figure. Its appearance almost looked like an 8-foot deer standing on its back legs. It turned its gaze towards mine. On what I assume is its face were 3 bright purple eyes staring right at me. I took no time in closing the blinds the moment it looked at me, hoping I would be safe from whatever it was that was out there. My phone read 7:17 p.m. when I heard the home phone ring. I was about to go over and answer it before I remembered one of the additional rules. Rule number 3. If anyone calls the house phone past 7 p.m., do not answer it, even if it's our number. At this point, I was willing to follow these rules to the letter. I had already had a few close calls due to me nearly not following these strange guidelines. So I let the phone ring a few more times before it went straight to voicemail, and I let out a sigh of relief. My phone read 7:31 p.m. I decided to start heading home. I was shaken by what I had seen. as I had no clue if it was all some kind of nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was very real. I hardly got any sleep that night, and by morning I was running late for the morning check. I drove down to the house and went up to the front door. I was about to unlock the door before I began hearing scratches behind the door. I froze up, not moving. I remembered the first rule. Arrive and enter at the same time each morning and evening. I decided to back away to my car. I wasn't sure what was behind the door, but I didn't want to find out. I got into my car and began to pull away. Just before I started driving away from the entrance, I saw those 3 purple eyes from the front window of the house gazing at me just as I drove off. That evening, I arrived at 6:45 to the site of my friend's car in the driveway. Confused, I got out, walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. After a minute, my friend answered the door and greeted me with his usual smile. "You guys are back early?" I spoke, confused. "Ah, right," my friend answered. "Our family couldn't all make it to my grandparents' Easter dinner, so we had to head home early." I nodded as he handed me the money I was promised. He wished me a good night and was about to close the door before I remembered the note. "By the way," I began to ask, "what was this note about? What's up with your house?" He looked at me, confused for a second before he got a look of realization in his eyes. He chuckled to himself before he answered, "I didn't really expect you to take that little joke seriously." "What do you mean?" "I just left that there to mess with you, man." He laughed. "None of that was anything you needed to worry about." It has been 1 day since I looked after my friend's house. The events of that night, even now, are still as clear as day. At first, I thought it was all just some kind of nightmare I had as a result of reading that list of house rules. Yet it couldn't have been a nightmare, and it was this day when I found that out. I got back to my house on Saturday around 7:15 in the morning. I, still being in a state of being half asleep and shaken up from last night's encounter, didn't realize until I got inside my home that I had kept the paper that had a strange set of rules in my pocket. I pulled out the now crumpled up sheet of paper just to make sure that the rule set I saw was real. While I expected the original list of rules, instead my eyes saw a new list of rules. They read as follows. Additional house rules. Rule number 1. Keep the front blinds of the house closed at all times. If you find them open for any reason, close them immediately. Rule number 2. If you hear knocking on the front door any time between noon and 1 p.m., or between 5:30 p.m. and 7 p.m., do not answer it. Do not look outside. Do not respond to any voice that may be behind the door. Rule number 3. Avoid looking outside between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. If you happen to look outside during those hours, close your eyes and turn the other direction. Stay like that for at least 10 seconds before leaving the room you're in. Avoid that room until 6 a.m. Rule number 4. If you wake up at 1:30 a.m. to the sound of scratching, stay still. Do not move until the scratching stops. If, instead of scratching, you hear something approaching you, hold your breath and stay still until you hear it leave. Rule number 5. Listen closely to any room you're about to enter. If you hear nothing after at least 5 seconds, you are safe. However, if you hear breathing, avoid entering until it goes silent. Close the door if it isn't already. They changed, I thought to myself. The rules changed. I rolled the paper into a tight ball and threw it into the trash can in the kitchen. I hoped it would null the rules in some way. When I turned around, I nearly backed into the trash can and knocked it over when I saw the paper on the kitchen table. Not only was it there, but it was back in pristine condition. I knew I had no choice. I had to deal with these rules, no matter what. It was 12:30 in the afternoon. I was attempting to take my mind off of the list by watching some TV when I heard a knock at the front door. I began to approach the door when I stopped myself. I heard another knock at the door. I simply stood there, unmoving, as if thinking that whatever was knocking on the door would stop if I simply didn't move. I heard a third knock at the door after a few moments. I held still, waiting until I heard nothing. Eventually, nothing came. No further knocking. I let out a long, relieved sigh, not realizing that I had held my breath for the duration of that. I leaned over to check the front blinds. Closed. I headed into the kitchen to refresh myself of the rules, making sure I had made the right choice. Later that night, around 7:30, I had started to wind down for the night. Nothing happened other than the knocking, and I thought I was in the clear. I approached my bedroom door and started to open it when I heard a very faint, ragged breathing behind the door. Immediately, I slammed the door shut and I pressed my ear right against the door. I heard that ragged, animalistic breathing right behind the door, almost as if whatever was there was waiting for me as much as I was waiting for it. After a short time, I heard the breathing begin to retreat away and vanish, after which I cracked the door open to see if it was actually safe. I saw nothing and got myself settled into sleep. I woke up suddenly during the night. The clock on my nightstand read 1:30 in the morning. I started looking around my pitch-black room when I began to hear faint scratching near the foot of my bed. I stayed completely still, just as I remembered. Eventually, the scratching stopped, and I began to sigh in relief when I started to hear the creaking of the floorboards slowly approaching the left side of my bed, almost like footsteps. I immediately held my breath, facing the ceiling and staying still. I moved my line of sight in the direction of the footsteps, and what I saw nearly made me release my breath. A tall, deer-like figure stood hunched over my bed. Its entire body was darker than the room, almost like I was staring at something made from the void itself. Where its face was supposed to be were 3 luminescent, deep purple eyes staring right into mine. It began to climb onto my bed, its thin, almost skeletal limbs on either side of my body like prison bars. One thing that was truly strange about this was the fact that it didn't seem to make any indentation on the mattress, despite its overwhelming stature. Its dark face was mere inches away from mine, breathing slow, ragged breaths as it seemed to almost judge me. I just kept my breath held and stayed perfectly still, hoping it would go away soon. It soon climbed off my bed and stalked out of my bedroom. Once it did, I released my breath and passed out. That morning, I got up and went to the kitchen to get some breakfast. I continued my morning as normal, or at least as normal as it could be regarding the last encounter. I went to school, bringing the rule list with me without thinking too much about it. Thankfully, nothing happened during the day. I didn't bring up anything that had happened during the night to any of my friends, not even bringing up the note at all. It was only when I got home that afternoon that I found out that the paper with the rules on it was now gone.